I've been recently diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and so sometimes you go, well, we think it's probably type 1.5,
Yeah.
but sometimes you go low, sometimes you go high.
Right.
So if your glucose is at, you know, it doesn't happen often, but 200.
Right.
Should I exercise my brain?
Well, you can't help it.
Can't help it.
If you're thinking, you're exercising your brain.
Okay. All right.
If you're feeling, if you're walking, if you're moving.
Is there something, I mean, they say exercise takes that down.
Physical exercise.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're demanding glucose to the muscle also as glycogen.
Yeah.
So you're using up your glycogen reserves and you're moving glucose into the muscle.
Okay.
And that all helps, especially vigorous exercise.
Yeah.
Now, diabetes type 1.5 is a late onset autoimmune condition.
Yeah.
Early onset juvenile, so-called juvenile diabetes, is an autoimmune condition. And the one food that's always a trigger 100% of the time for juvenile diabetics is dairy. 100% of the time. They all show antibodies to dairy, to the lactalbumin in dairy.
Okay.
Not just the lactose, but the casein and like the protein structures of dairy.
Yeah.
So dairy is out, therefore so is eggs,
Uh-huh.
and so is gluten. Okay. And sugars are completely out.
Yeah.
Now, we measure food reactivities to patients that go through 1.5 diabetes or 2.0, whatever. And there's other foods that commonly show up as reactors that are pro-inflammatory triggers also that engage the brain even more by causing the brain to inflame. So we measure those. One of the most common, by the way, is black beans. Black beans and navy beans. And therefore its cross-reactor is soybean. Those are common. Another big one is alfalfa sprouts. It's amazingly common. Sometimes I see things like garlic or ginger or brewer's yeast, for example. But I can't say for everybody what it's going to be like because no two people are alike. But these are common reactors. So we take all that out of the equation. And with diabetics, we also measure the hormonal picture, especially the adrenals and thyroid, to make sure there's no reactivity going on in the thyroid and that the adrenals are functional, because they help regulate glucose through cortisol. So we find in most cases the adrenals are exhausted or functionally failed. So we do work to rehabilitate the adrenals as well. We also always check the liver, okay? Because it's metabolizing everything that's going through your system, as is the gut, but it also regulates glucose control, because that's where the protein is taken to convert to glucose in the liver.
So, but if your kidneys are doing fine, then your liver's doing fine?
Not necessarily. The problem starts in the liver, then the kidneys, then lymphatics, and the skin. That's the progression we see. But you can have the skin being fine, lymphatics functional, kidneys functional, but the liver's not. So you can't just look downstream, you have to look all the way upstream. And then you look at the diet, which affects the liver.
Did I hear you say just now that if you're diabetic that alfalfa sprouts and things like that were not good?
What I'm saying is this, it's a good question. So I measure those food reactivities through blood testing. There's one lab I use out of Seattle called Meridian Valley Labs, and I've used them for decades. I've looked at other labs. I can't get consistent data, although some labs are beginning to come up to that level of integrity. But one food I find almost universally showing up is alfalfa sprouts. It's just what I see clinically.
Next.
Not always, but most cases.
Yeah, it may be that you're not.
Yeah, but I check that on each individual. I can't make a blanket statement about that.
He's just saying it shows up a lot.
Yeah, like 99% of the time, but.
Yeah.
You want the mic, honey?
Mike?
Or come up here? Yeah, come up here, sweetheart. Thank you. When it comes to food, my wife cooks, I clean. Yeah.
So there's not one type 2 diabetes case. Where do you want me, Bill? Not one case of type 2 diabetes that isn't 100% off their meds and completely level blood pressure in a 2-week span of our health retreat program. And it's diet. And the thing that will get you through it the quickest and normalize your blood sugar is raw foods, organic raw produce. And sprouting is a great thing to do, but it's just the alfalfa. There's lots of other kinds of seeds to sprout. Yeah.
And we see that routinely at the retreats. Now, I work with diabetics in practice, but they're not going to follow a raw food vegan diet. They come to the retreat to do that because it's labor intensive and it takes understanding. And my wife trains them how to do that so they can continue that at home. So, and it's not 100% raw at home all the time. But that's what it takes to get the blood sugars to normalize and stabilize. Good. Yeah, and oh, there's a great documentary called What the Health. You have to enunciate. There's Forks Over Knives that demonstrated T. Colin Campbell's research on cancer and Caldwell Esselstyn Jr.'s research on heart disease, showing a plant-based diet germane to both, followed by What the Health, showing the downside of flesh food eating, meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy, on diabetes. And then the other sequel to that was called The Game Changers, looking at a vegan diet in terms of high-level athletics and its value. Those three are excellent documentaries to observe. But What the Health, especially in terms of diabetes. Yeah. Here, I guess we're doing this so people can actually hear the question. Thank you.
I recently had my blood tested about 2 weeks ago, and it came back that I was slightly low in platelets, and they're going to monitor that. And is there any particular thing that I should do other than what I'm trying to do as what we've been talking about here?
Yeah.
But of course,
So when platelets drop, then agglutination becomes an issue. Now, 90% of serotonin is carried by platelets. So it affects serotonin function, which can affect then hormonal patterns and anxiety issues or depressive issues or emotional patterns. It can be that way also, not necessarily. But when platelets drop, then you look at why, and they're made in the bone marrow, as you know, and they have a lot of other functions, but one of which is carrying serotonin, another is clotting blood. And so if they're low, then that becomes an issue potentially with hemorrhaging. Like you bump your forearm and you get a bruise that takes a long time to reabsorb. So we look at why the platelets are low. It's a bone marrow function, but it's also dependent upon liver function for hemopoiesis and red blood cell production or blood element production. So we do a workup to see what's behind it. And I've worked with people with low platelets that have come back up, but there's no one size fits all. That you're going to see that routinely in this question answer process. Two different people have the same symptom picture, but different processes going on. And the ways to manage recovery are not the same for each individual or from one person to another. Each one is particularly unique. So we look at what's going on with your liver, with your brain chemistries, with your diet, with your hormonal picture to see what's behind that, with your gut, that affects platelet formation for your body. And we write those patterns so the platelets can also resolve. So the approach I take is not take this for that alone. It's physiologic medicine, not pharmacologic medicine. So I'm not looking at, my wife's asking me to give you your phone number. I will in a moment for the office. But the key is we're looking at what's behind your particular physiology. Why is it suboptimal? Okay. Once we know the larger picture, then we know how to deal with that effectively. It's going to be botanical medicine, nutrition, diet, principally. Lifestyle patterns, exercise, sleep, exercise, etc. These are critical. But we see how critical each of those pieces are. Each one is for your recovery. And information like I get from lifestyle and history and chemistries, in great measure, gives me that kind of locus of information to know where to focus the attention. But it's physiologic medicine, not pharmacologic medicine. So I'm not looking at a named disease. I have to come up with a name of pathology for insurance purposes, but not for the patient and not for me. I'm looking to understand why. What's the physiology behind it? What's the process involved behind the person's symptom picture? When I understand the process involved, then we know what to do. And then the patient is understanding it. I like intelligent patients. I like educated patients. So I educate my patients all the time about what's going on with their body and why. and what we're doing about it and why we're doing it the way we're doing it. So they understand what the process is about, why we're checking things on down the line the way we are to make sure they're on track and not just dependent upon their symptoms alone. I have to know that the chemistries are also coming in line, the hormones are coming into line, to understand that the health is really being regenerated. It's not just do you feel better today. No, that's subjective. I want to know objectively also, what does it look like to know that your body's improving? And then I get real data that way. And it correlates beautifully, one-to-one, with a person's clinical picture over time.
So real quick, write this down: 541-773-8111. If you don't have a pencil pen, call me, ask me. 541-773-8111. That's
the
Dr.
office number.
Saeed's office.
That's the office number.
Yeah.
And you'll talk to Vinny. Right there. 541.
541-773-8111.
Yeah.
Yeah, phone consult. He's fun to talk to.
Yeah, my patients I see virtually through FaceTime, through Zoom, through the virtual online systems or phone. And we order labs all over the country, all over the world. If I need imaging studies done, we'll get them done locally. If I need other consultations done, we get them done through other specialists until I get the data that I need. And for most people, it's looking at the diet, hormones, and chemistry. Those are three major pieces. If I need more, we'll get more. And insurance classically covers that unless it's Medicare. And Medicare, after Obamacare, only covers labs ordered by MDs, DOs, or nurse practitioners. They used to cover all my labs until Obamacare. So we work with MDs, DOs, or nurse practitioners to get it ordered. So insurance covers it through Medicare. Some labs Medicare won't touch. They used to, but no longer after Obamacare. So that was a real blow to the healthcare system. But that's another story. But there's ways of getting things done. I try to keep it cost effective for my patients. We don't mark up labs even a penny. That's, all our kits are free. And so the cost of the labs is what the lab charges me. So we try to keep things really cost contained, I understand.
Okay, so he was talking about platelets, and that brought up my question. I've had low platelets my whole life. I almost hemorrhaged to death after both of my deliveries in my 20s.
Wait, did what with your deliveries?
When I had the babies,
Uh-huh.
after both of them, I almost hemorrhaged to death.
Okay.
I had to go back into surgery and be packed and
Yeah.
and so forth. But all my life, my platelets have been low. But they just said, well, it's 100 to 125. That's okay. You'll be fine. And nobody ever said anything about. And I feel fine. You know, there's
Right,
nothing. So I didn't think anything about it until about 4 years ago, and went through a death in a family and a lot of stress, and they went down to 29.
Oh,
And they said, you go any further and you're gonna have to be hospitalized.
right.
So then I started watching. They started doing me every month, and then gradually they would start coming up, and then they'd go down, and they'd come up, and they'd go down, and they didn't know what to do. I went to a hematologist.
Sure.
He said, well, if they're above 50, you'll be fine. Well, they got above 50,
Yeah.
and right now, like I just was tested, it's 88 now.
Okay.
So it's gradually come up. So, I mean, I feel like if I can get to 90 or 100, that's what I was the rest of my life. But they thought it was an autoimmune disease because when I got sick, my platelets jumped up to 179, you know,
Okay, so they
just immediately.
Yeah.
And then they would gradually come back down. Then if I got sick again, they'd jump up.
Right.
So he said, your body can make them. You can make
Right, you're
platelets,
just
but
not
you're
doing
just destroying them as soon as.
Right.
And so it was like, well, what? Because, you know, what do you think?
So the notion of autoimmunity is likely significant. Now, there's a lab we use on occasion because it's not cheap, but there's a lab we use on occasion that measures 55 different tissue types to see if the body's showing autoimmunity to any of those. It's a brilliant lab. I know the lab director personally. He's been at this a long, long time. And he created these labs, and they're really accurate. So if that shows up, and I've seen autoimmunity to bone, to adrenals, to brain, parts of the brain, parts of cells. I've seen autoimmunity to all kinds of tissue structures. But the process of dealing with autoimmunity itself is its own process of healing. Okay? So and it makes sense, that makes a lot of sense, because you can make platelets, but you're also destroying them very rapidly. Okay. So why? Why is your body doing that at the bone level, bone marrow level?
That's what I'd like to know.
Right. So that's where we test to see what's going on behind it. Now, many autoimmune conditions are driven by diet. Because if you eat a food that doesn't fully digest because of snacking or your poor digestive capacity, then the undigested protein is seen as a foreign protein, like a bug. It doesn't belong in your body. So the immune system automatically measures it, attacks it, but then it surveils the rest of the body on a reconnaissance mission to find similar protein structures to attack. It also crosses the blood-brain barrier and attacks the brain. But if you have other tissues that look like that, that mimic that, it's called molecular mimicry, then the immune system attacks those tissues also. And if they're platelet progenitor cells, then you can't generate them, or if you break them down too fast. So then you look at what are the triggers behind that, and how do you shift that picture? So there's an imbalance in the immune system of creating too many B cells attacking tissue and not enough neutrophils dealing with infections, for example. It's called a B cell overdrive. So it's a Th2 overdrive. That's T helper cell type 2, creates the B cell population. I'll leave the technicalities out. But there's ways of reorienting that to balance the Th1, Th2 size of the immune system to stop attacking tissue and then protecting the tissue at the same time. We use nutrition to do that. It's well known how to do that.
Have you heard of fulvic and humic acid?
Yeah.
Because one of the persons I talked to said that that was a good idea.
Well, fulvic and humic acids are okay, but they're non-specific. Okay. So they're not going to give the kind of nutrition that I'm talking about here. I'm talking about very targeted nutrition that's well known. And we do that with patients, but we measure to see what's actually going on, what do you actually need. So I just don't give you something because it sounds good. I give you something because it is doing something that we understand what the process is. We can actually track it.
Well, right after that, I ended up with a really severe case of Sjogren's, where it wasn't
another
just dry mouth and eyes, but
Right.
it was joints. It was like rheumatoid joints.
I get
And
it.
within 2 years, I was completely well.
Right.
But I was really careful to eat everything I didn't like. I had more stuff that I couldn't stand before, but I said, I must be missing something. So I ate, smoothies, I had salads, I did everything for 2 years. And I also took flaxseed oil.
Sure.
And it made a difference. So my immune markers, my inflammation markers are just down to 0.
Right. Well, your omega-3s went up, omega-6 went down.
But the platelets are just
Understand.
the same.
So
same.
there may be other things going on affecting the bone marrow, or platelet aggregation issues that we can look at. But Sjogren's is an autoimmune condition, connective tissue disorder.
Not too many people get completely this, according to the rheumatologist. He said, "Oh, you'll be like this the rest of your life." Well, I'm not.
Well, even MS can be regarded as an autoimmune condition.
Yeah.
So there's ways of getting yourself into that, and ways of getting your way out of that.
Yeah.
So not many people get out of it because they don't know how.
I am trying. That's what I'm trying to tell you.
I respect it. I really do. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So.
But there's other things going on that are not yet ascertained that are wise to look at. Yeah. Gluten's a huge trigger. If there's an autoimmune condition, the 5 big things that people avoid are eggs, dairy, gluten, soy, and sugar. That's where we start.
Well, how long do you have to avoid it till you know that it's a trigger or not?
The rest of your life.
Do you have a blood test that shows that?
We actually showed that, on blood testing.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't leave it to imagination. Yeah, but there's enough in the medical literature proving the relationship between those and autoimmune conditions. Now, one last point. When we measure autoimmunity or measure immune reactivities to foods, there's 5 different immunoglobulin families. Okay, GAME, gamed. So IgG and IgM are most commonly measured. IgA we measure from the gut, and IgD is more rarely measured. IgE is for true allergy reactivities, which if you take something and you have that type of reaction, so it's going to close off, you're going to get hives, etc. You can also get histamine reactions, which can mimic that. But for foods, we measure IgG4 reactivities and sometimes IgA reactivities. So very few labs know how to do that. Most all of them measure IgE reactivities. So you're not getting clear information. So you have to do the right kind of testing to get good information about what's actually going on.
Hypothyroidism, you've mentioned that 2 or 3 times. Go into a little bit more detail on what the causes, the
Sure.
problems with synthetic thyroid medication, and also natural recovery.
Sure. Wow. So that's a loaded question. I work with thyroid issues a lot. Hypothyroid, Graves, Hashimoto's, autoimmune thyroiditis, a lot, all over the country. And on sometimes a daily basis. And so I've taken over cases from endocrinologists who don't understand thyroid issues. So there are hypothyroid issues that are Hashimoto's based or autoimmune based, where the body's reactive to certain foods. Those foods mimic the thyroid peroxidase levels or antithyroid levels that make thyroid hormone from tyrosine. And so if the body's attacking those hormones, you can't make thyroxine or thyroid hormone very efficiently. And then you've turned the thyroid into scar tissue because it's inflamed so much, and it becomes less and less productive or functional of generating thyroxine. Now the thyroid makes 2 hormones, T4 and T3, tetrahydrothyronine and tyrothyronine, or thyroxine and liothyronine. And so those are the 2 hormones made by the thyroid. T4 has 4 iodines, T3 has 3 iodines. T4 is the storage form of thyroid, T3 is the active form of thyroid hormone. So the body has to cleave off one of the iodines to make T3 to make the storage form of iodine active. So we measure both the free fraction of T4 and the free fraction of T3. And then the TSH from the pituitary telling the thyroid how much thyroid hormone to make. So the brain's always monitoring thyroid hormone needs for the entire body. Now, every cell of your body has a thyroid hormone receptor, every single cell. So it's determining the metabolic rate of every cell of your body. So it's hugely important. Many patients are hypothyroid and don't know it. So I measure thyroid issues in all my new patients, every single one. And we're surprised oftentimes about what's going on with the thyroid they didn't even know about. So when the thyroid is depressed, change the diet first. Sometimes we'll measure usable iodine to make sure you're getting sufficient iodine to make thyroid hormone. Now tyrosine is also part of that, and many people are deficient in tyrosine to make thyroid hormone. So make sure that that's happening in the diet. When we find those parameters managed, but the thyroid is still depressed from long-term scarring or deficiency of function for lots of reasons, we'll use thyroid hormone replacement. Now there's 2 ways to go with that: natural desiccated thyroid hormone and synthetic thyroid hormone. Natural desiccated thyroid typically comes from pigs, sometimes sheep, sometimes cows. Most people respond best to pig thyroid, as disgusting as that sounds. And those natural desiccated thyroid forms have both T4 and T3 together. That's in the thyroid tissue naturally. So you're getting a 4-to-1 ratio of T4 to T3. And we know how much you get per 60 milligrams or per grain of thyroid hormone. So we can dictate how much of that is necessary to regulate thyroid function. Then I retest every month until we get a fully functional thyroid. Now some people don't do well with natural desiccated thyroid. We have to go to synthetic thyroid because they need more T4 and less T3, or more T3, less T4, and you can't regulate that in a natural desiccated thyroid. I'll do a hybrid approach, natural desiccated with additional T4, additional T3, as the body can tolerate and they can break down. But the testing that we do determines how to best do that. Now there are 6 schools of thought for thyroid prescriptions. Endocrinologists use one size fits all, which isn't true. That's not how the body works. So I've studied all 6, and we use all 6, but 3 of them are used most of the time. So I hybridize what's needed for the thyroid. And then over time, what I find is as the thyroid starts functioning better and the liver is functioning better, and so is the gut, because T4 is converted to T3, 90% in the liver, 60% in the liver and 20% in the gut. Now another 20% goes to reverse T3 to regulate thyroid utilization. So we want to make sure that the gut and the liver are functional to actually make T4 to T3. That's essential to do. So as in my patients, as their liver and the gut improve in health, they need less and less and less thyroid hormone. I have some patients come off it altogether. Others reduce it substantially over time. And as the body starts converting and manufacturing more efficiently, the need for that is less and less and less. So that's what I've seen with patients over time. But it's not a one-size-fits-all at all. Okay? There's a lot of nuances for each individual and the same individual over time. But I work to regulate it so it's optimized, not just normalized. Okay, you can have a very low normal T3 and not do well, or a high T4 normal and not do well, or a high TSH normal but not do well. So we look at optimal ranges for those three hormones, from the pituitary and the thyroid, until it's regulated optimally. And then a person feels great at that level for the thyroid. Now at the same time, we want to make sure the adrenals are functional, because the thyroid and adrenals affect each other profoundly, endocrine-wise. So I work with both together. That's the simple version. Pardon? The question is kelp helpful? It used to be. What I found is after Fukushima blew in Japan, we've polluted the Pacific Ocean and the other oceans now, so the Pacific is now legally a dead ocean. All right. What happens is in a normal ocean, you have about 3% dead material at the bottom of the ocean. They measured the Pacific as 97% dead material in the bottom. And we're starting to see cancers through all kinds of aquatic life in the Pacific and dead plant life. So kelp from the Pacific is not desirable. So I'm measuring kelp patterns in patients, and they're showing reactivity to kelp more and more and more. So I'm very careful with kelp and seaweed. It's principally the Pacific, where we're seeing it infiltrate worldwide. Yeah. So if you like unhealthy cardboard, gluten substitutes work just great. Okay. So gluten substitutes are at best disgusting most of the time. And it's just a catchword, say gluten-free, but it doesn't mean that it's sugar-free or dairy-free or egg-free or xanthan gum-free or additive-free at all. No. So it's rare to find a bread, for example, or a pasta or flour that is truly functional and tastes good and is really gluten-free. Now, the best bread we've found is made by Simple Needs. They're using only organic grains and seeds and psyllium. And we know exactly what's in it because the company is owned and run by my wife's two sons. So we know exactly what's in it. Well, I'll come to that. So the bread, they have 4 different kinds and it tastes great. And it's just simpleneeds.com. Needs is spelled K-N-E-A-D-S, like kneading bread. So if the price is prohibitive, I understand. It freezes well, so if you're judicious using it, you will have on occasion, up to you. But I have some patients who can't afford it. I understand. And they learn to make their own bread. Or they work with a baker to figure something out. But they come up with something that's workable for them, or they just don't bother anymore. Okay. So it's hard to find a good gluten-free bread that's also devoid of additives and eggs and dairy and sugars and things of that nature, and gums. So Tristan, Rhonda's second son, developed this. He's a chemist and a brilliant chef and baker. And I saw his algorithms to create this formula. He created it in our ovens when we were in Southern Oregon. So we ate a lot of his trials. It's a great bread. Well, they can. And I saw what he went through to create what he did. That's sourdough. There's no yeast. Okay. And the algorithms were, it's sourdough, gluten-free bread. And it's sourdough bread. I'm going to eat it every day. Yeah. No, I know. That's the only bread I'll eat. But he came up with a cinnamon raisin bread, a pumpernickel bread, or pumpkin nickel he calls it, sourdough, and a quinoa-based bread. At any rate, we love the sourdough. But it's all sourdough bread, so there's no yeast. It's just culture. And it comes from the same culture that Ellen White used back in the 1800s in Australia. and it came from Australia. But right, let me just finish this one. Oh, okay, Virginia. Okay, thank you very much. So if you're going to speak, please use the mic. If there's more you want to, if you want to address the question again, I will. So if you're going to make your own bread, it can be done. I've had patients do that. It's not easy. When I looked at Tristan's algorithms that he made his bread from, they're fantastically complex. Many companies have tried reproducing his bread and can't. Okay? It's very finely put together, very finely put together. He has to control the moisture content, etc. It's hugely significant what he had to go through to get there, and then commercialize it and have it taste really good continually. And he's always developing it and refining it further or perfecting the recipe. So it's awesome bread. And it's hard to reproduce. In fact, they've not been able to. So when people make their own bread, it's going to be in a proximity to that or close approximation. But it's not that bread. But many people, patients who love baking, will come up with their own recipes and keep it devoid of the things they don't want that I mentioned and have it truly be gluten-free. But many end up getting simple needs bread and just using it when they can afford it, if they can't otherwise. But that's what I've seen most of the time.
I guess just a comment, but it seems to me like if God wants us to be healthy and we need to eat, that there should be some simpler way to take care of our needs than.
Well, I appreciate it. And to what extent do we need bread? I mean, we've gone out to eat and we use lettuce wraps as an example, or use collard wraps.
Right. I just wondered if maybe you had come across some source of recipes or whatever that.
That's a
Do you
good
know what I'm
question.
trying to say? I'm
No,
not
I get it.
articulating.
No, I respect it. So, my wife is moving.
If you can make flat bread, if you really need bread, we've just learned that we don't have to have bread. I also make waffles without any gluten or anything, and you can make them thinner and make them into bread. But you can make flat bread and just, I disagree with the theory that you can make a good gluten-free loaf because I've tried for 20 years. And I've tried, I love to cook, and I've tried every recipe, and I can't make a good gluten-free loaf of bread without eggs or any of that in it. But you can make flat bread. You can take mesa too and make your own corn, or be sure you use organic and non-GMO corn, but make your own corn tortillas and make them like bread. You can mix rice flour with the corn and make it more like a bread and make a flat bread. You can get a press that's electric, which I have, and you can press the flatbread. And so that's, it's a compromise, but it's a shame that they've ruined the gluten. The molecular structure of gluten is not the same as it was the way God created it, so it's a problem. I wouldn't touch gluten for any reason.
No. Now, I have had patients who tell me they've made a gluten-free bread without eggs and dairy, and but that's rare. They have done it, they tell me, but I don't see them eating it a lot. And some patients don't tolerate grains well at all, as an example, or the lectins in the grains. So they'll just do different foods. They won't go to bread. If we can't get that bread, we just go without bread, and I'm fine with that. But Rhonda does make flatbread, and she does make waffles, which are awesome. And you can make those out of beans and grains and seeds. Yeah. Yeah. So they're edible. They taste great. You can make them savory or make them sweet or whatever you like. And Rhonda's got recipes to do all of that.
And muffins, you can make muffins really easy, a lot better than bread.
Yeah.
If I ever can have the time to get them all together, I'm going to have a cookbook.
This is a long-awaited cookbook. I know, which I'm wanting to write the foreword for, so hopefully this winter we'll be able to get it finished.
Talking about gluten, it seems to me years ago when we got these health foods that they were gluten, and our own Loma Linda and
Right.
Worthington brands now, are they made of basically of gluten?
Well, it's a good question. So gluten used to not be an issue, staff of life, but it was only, the wheat was 5% gluten. Then the bread industry was using gluten as dough pep to have the dough stick together. So to meet that need, the wheat industry started hybridizing wheat to make it more and more gluten rich, till now it's 50% gluten, not 5% gluten. And we can't break down that protein efficiently. And so the body develops antibodies against that protein. Many people end up with celiac, or what's called non-celiac gluten neuropathy, where we can't break it down. The body then has to deal with the gluten effect. Gluten creates what's called zonulin and occlutin in the gut, which then is sequestered by the gut cells or enterocytes, and it breaks down the tight junctions between the gut cells. I mentioned this a little bit last night. Those tight junctions that would hold the gut cells together, that allow for small molecules like vitamins and minerals to get through, but stop large molecules like undigested proteins from getting through. But when you break down the tight junctions, now the large molecules that shouldn't get through do get through, and the small molecules like vitamins and minerals don't get through. So now you end up with nutritional deficiencies and food reactivities to the large proteins that the body taxes foreign protein. And you start the whole autoimmune issue from molecular mimicry and attacking other tissue types. That's because of that leaky gut from gluten opening up the gut lining. So then you start reacting to not just gluten, but a lot of other kinds of foods also. The worst I ever saw was a 2-year-old with head to toe eczema, miserable. And we tested that child's food reactivities. I think there were like half a dozen foods he could eat. So we helped him rehabilitate. In 3 weeks, the skin was completely cleared. After several years, the kid was great. His dad was an ER doc. I don't even know how they found me. They went then to a pediatrician. The pediatrician said, don't listen to that doctor who helped you with the diet. Eat anything you want. They made the mistake of listening to that pediatrician. Guess what happened? Eczema. They called me in a panic. I said, all right, let's see what's going on. We evaluated further, got him on a clear diet. 3 weeks later, guess what happened? No more eczema. Guess what happened after that? They didn't test it anymore. They stayed the course. We tested him further. We'd add foods back in. The kid's got clear skin, brilliant kid, an athlete, in his teens now, doing great. Okay, that was the worst case I saw with food reactivities. I've seen bad cases. This was the worst. But when you clear up the diet, and you take out the foods that are pro-inflammatory and toxic, which we mentioned a little bit today, that makes a huge difference in a person's health recovery from all kinds of issues, not just eczema, all kinds of health issues. Ellen White talks about that directly. So gluten, unfortunately, became hybridized so it's no longer physiologically sound to take in. People don't do well with it. There have been papers written showing that nobody does well with it because of the gut reaction to it. So it's unfortunately become a real problem. Now, most people don't notice a reaction because they don't have a true celiac reaction, which is going to affect either the skin, the gut, or the brain. They're called tissue transglutaminases, which we can measure, and there's 3 different forms to know what kind of tissue structure it's going to affect. But people that don't have celiac disease can still affect those structures, it's just not as severe. Most people only notice they eat it and they get fatigued. But they're so used to that fatigue they don't think about it until they stop it and they realize, whoa, this is what it's like to have energy again. They try it again and they get fatigued. And they go, I'm not going to go there anymore. That's the most common reaction I see is fatigue and brain fog. And they stop the gluten and their brain clears up. So I know my wife can tell you many stories like that, but I've seen thousands of cases over the years, thousands. So I watch this clinically. So I don't just give you this information because I think it's a neat idea or I read about it somewhere. I see where the rubber meets the road with my patients. I see what actually happens in the lives of real people every single day of my career, over tens of thousands of patients. About Big Franks? Wow. All right, so I don't know, I wouldn't call it health food. I wouldn't go that far. But when I see these kinds of texturized proteins from either gluten or soy, they're going to be free glutamates. If they're texturized or proteolyzed, look at the label. And that's just like taking an MSG product. It's a neurotoxin. I can't recommend it. So be very careful about the label. How is it made? What is it made from? Is it heated up? You take soy and gluten and you heat them up, they become free glutamates in the heated state also. So yeast does the same thing. So you have to be careful about the kind of food you're taking in. I don't care what company it comes from. I don't care who subsidizes it. What I care about is what is it doing to my patient's body? And what does the research literature demonstrate to that? We can correlate that. And how does it corroborate with the spirit of prophecy? I'll look at all of that. If they correlate and corroborate, I have no problem teaching that and sharing it with my patients. And that's what I base my practice on.
Just a quick question on the same note. So what about einkorn wheat? So einkorn is supposed to be one of the last unadulterated grains.
So I've had that question asked by many patients. We checked it out. It still has some gluten. If a person has a gluten intolerance, they don't tolerate any gluten. Even a little bit potentiates a reaction to it because they've already got circulating antibodies. You want to talk into that? You want to talk into the mic?
That even if it's unhybridized?
Even if it's unhybridized. Yeah, that's right. That's what people with true gluten reactivities. They don't tolerate even that. Now there used to be
For somebody that doesn't have an actual gluten, no reactivity like like a celiac or something like that, would einkorn be sufficient, or are you saying no gluten whatsoever?
I've seen many non-celiac gluten intolerances that still react to that. Now, it used to be a time when people could go to Europe and eat the gluten in Europe. They'd go to Italy and have pasta and pizza and do fine, come to this country and get sick with the same foods here. That's no longer the case. I'm seeing it even in Europe now. So there's more and more reactivity to gluten. We're more potentiated to that reactivity. So even things like einkorn that's non-hybridized, if it has gluten, still can become reactive in those patients. Now, the difficulty is testing. If it's an IgE reactivity, no question. That's true allergy. If it's an IgG4 reactivity, no question. It's a true hypersensitivity. If it's IgA, true hypersensitivity. But rarely does anybody measure all of those aspects of gluten. So we measure other parts of gluten that are not that part of it, but create reactions in the gut. If those react, it's still going to be an issue. So there's ways of testing it secondarily to the effects it has, not directly to the gluten itself. And there's labs that really specialize in that, like Cyrus Labs. They're really good.
Yeah, a year ago, I withdrew from my professional career, aka retired, and currently a home civil engineer, aka handyman.
Okay.
The last year of work was very stressful. I was carrying a double caseload, and I contracted COVID and got long COVID, and which lasted about 3 or 4 months.
Okay.
But it seemed like something that continued after that was I had some problems with my back and my hands, particularly my right hand. I couldn't close it. And in the year since I've been off from work and doing a lot of biking and working around the house, stuff like that, I can now close my hands. They're still very stiff and painful at times. And my back's a lot better.
Good.
But I just wondered, is there anything that a person can do that can help with,
So,
like arthritis, I guess?
Yeah, no, I respect the question a lot. I work with COVID a ton. I've brought more letters getting people off of vaccines and related issues in the last 2 years than I've ever done in my entire career.
Part of the reason I quit too is they were starting to push the vaccine at my place of work, and I wasn't going to go with it.
No, you're very wise. And that may be heresy in some circles, but not where I live. And so I've done enough research over that, on medical literature, and for the last 2.5 years, that I really appreciate the issues. There we go. So, and long COVID is classically a neurologic issue, classically. That most of the literature points to that. And so we deal with it by treating it as a COVID issue. And I have a whole protocol for that. And then there's also things we add for the long COVID issues, depending on the details that a person's experiencing. But with the long COVID pattern, I always check chemistries to see what's been debilitated during that process, or what was a problem at the outset that wasn't known that allowed it to become a long COVID issue. So I can send you my respiratory protocol. Just Vinny can do that if you'd like. But I like to do it so that you understand what's going on. So I usually do a consultation with people briefly to walk them through it, especially with a long COVID problem. So if you've had chemistries done or things of that nature, I like to look at that stuff first to see, all right, what else is going on here? And when you have stiffness in the hands, always look to the liver. Always look to the liver. Because that's metabolizing the toxins also that you can't do in many cases. So we deal with that. We deal with phase 1, phase 2 conjugation issues that affect tissues and liver function. It's called the CYP450 group of enzymes that detoxify the tissue structures and make sure the antioxidant capacity is there to get toxins from there to the liver without damaging the vascular system. Then we do the phase 2 conjugation issues with the liver itself and deal with detoxing the gut. So all that whole train is free to detox the system effectively. So there's ways of doing that, but I assess what's going on with your body individually to know how to best do that for you. But you can do something as simple as milk thistle, honestly, tea even, to just start draining the liver and thinning out the bile. That and dandelion. That's simple. Okay. But that's a start. Then we look at details beyond all that. I also use pectisol C, which is apple pectin or citrus pectin, usually apple pectin, to start detoxing the system from the tissue level. There's ways of doing antioxidant support and phase 2 liver conjugation, but milk thistle dandelion is a start. And in many cases, we have to go much deeper than that, but that's a great start. And obviously avoid garbage, which we talked about earlier today. But long haul COVID is a big problem. I work with that a fair amount, and it's increasing, unfortunately. Go ahead.
Just quick before I have several questions, but the website of the gluten-free bread that your relatives were making, you mentioned it. What was it?
It's our son.
Yeah.
It's called Simple Needs. Simple, S-I-M-P-L-E, Needs, K-N-E-A-D-S, like kneading bread.
Oh.
Simpleneeds.com.
Okay. And then Virginia was mentioning, Virginia, I did a lot of research on gluten-free breads and recipes. I have a whole binder full I can share with you. Years ago, I went gluten-free, but because I had systemic candida and then adrenal burnout, and so I went off gluten and healed that and went back to. And my question was, should everyone be off gluten? But I think you answered my question. Your answer is everyone should be because
that's my experience in practice.
Of the hybridized. Yeah. So we went back to just making whole wheat bread, but I don't know.
I don't encourage gluten for my patients.
Yeah.
I've just seen the downside way too much.
Yeah.
When people go back to it, they oftentimes reproduce things they used to have. It just takes a while, and they're back at it again.
Yeah,
so I'm just careful with that.
Yeah, I don't know if we should just try getting off and then
Yeah.
going back and see what happens. But
Well, you have that option.
Yeah, yeah. Another question I have is, a few years ago I started noticing having dry eyes, and they say as you get older you have that issue, and to me it seems like it's related to my salt intake,
because I'm not much of a salt person, and so I hardly salted my food at all, and I was having issues at night, having anxiety, and Dr. Stoll told me to go on iodine. I did that, and it cleared it up.
Right.
Because I was using the pink Himalayan
Uh-huh.
salt. It doesn't have iodine in it.
Right.
So I started using that. But I'm finding some evenings I have almost wake up with my eyelids shut, almost glued to
Right.
my eyeballs because my eyes are so dry.
Sure.
Some nights it's really bad, sometimes it's not. So
Okay.
I'm wondering if it's, to me it seems like it's taking in enough salt and not too much.
Well, salt is easy enough to measure in the blood to get the electrolytes. Some people need salt, some people need less salt, some people need more salt. So that I can't comment on that until I see what that looks like. So you're telling me something's subjective, but I want to be able to corroborate that with what's going on in your body. The other thing I find with dry eyes is lack of essential fatty acids. So I like EPA, DHA out of algae, marine algae, that can be high source. That's what fish eat to make oils for their bodies.
I eat a lot of walnuts.
That's
Yeah.
okay, but I
Yeah.
find algae works even better because it's direct EPA, DHA, not just linoleic acid.
Green algae
No,
or
it's called algae omega. It's a synthesized form. Well, it's a concentrated form of EPA, DHA from algae, marine algae. And a company that's very good at that is Nordic Naturals. They specialize in it.
Nordic.
But I find Nordic Naturals.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So, yeah, we provide this for my patients through Fullscript, but it's a way to get essential fatty acids readily into the system. And for dry eye, that's essential.
Oh.
Yeah.
So it's an essential fatty acid deficiency.
That's right. Now,
So
iodine may not be an issue. There's ways of measuring iodine to know what you actually need. It's an expensive test, so it's not just run routinely, but it can be done. And many people are deficient in iodine or have low normal levels of iodine. And I'll pulse iodine maybe once every 2 weeks or once a month for them, so they don't overdrive iodine.
So the essential fatty acid, is it helpful to take like flaxseed and walnut?
Well, if you're not reactive to it, it's fine. But I find many patients are reactive, especially to flax seeds.
Reactive? Why?
Great question. It's a structure the body can't break down. I don't know why in their body.
I mean,
Well,
even
we know
if
that
you
it's an
blend
issue.
it up into a
Won't
fine
matter.
powder?
It's the protein that they can't break down.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a lectin kind of issue that they can't break down. So we get them off flax and use other kinds of seeds instead that they can tolerate. Every once in a while, find a patient who doesn't tolerate nuts and seeds much at all, and we have to rotate the few that they can tolerate. And when they stay away from the ones they don't tolerate, they improve. They start to recover. I had a patient last week like that. There are four seeds of nuts she could tolerate. And so she learned to live with what she couldn't tolerate and started to improve her health markedly. And now we can add back a few more things because she stayed away from them. So the antibody levels or titers came down so she can pulse them back in the diet. And we talked about how to do that. So I see that routinely. Symptoms improve, overall health improves. Some foods can be added back, but pulse them in gently to not overload the system. But the nutrition becomes important in something like this. But essential fatty acids are really important. Yeah.
And you're suggesting this Nordic?
I do it this way because I'm not having to guess whether you're reactive or not to that, whereas I'm not sure what you're reactive to in the nut and seed group. Yeah. So we test that to know.
And you can just go online and find.
Or you can call Vinny. She knows how to get it.
Okay.
Up to you.
And then another quick question is I know the processed soy, is not good, but the soybean as God grew it, is that a bad bean to use?
Yes and no. So here's the issue with soy. Soy is high in phytoestrogen, but it doesn't necessarily drive up estrogen. But it's high in phytic acid, hemagglutinins, and amitripsins. So it limits the assimilation of vitamins, minerals, and proteins, and can cause red blood cells to clump into rouleau formation, so now they can't get through the capillary sponge very efficiently. So soy becomes an issue. Now most soy is now genetically modified also, so it's no longer fit to eat. So I
Even
have
the
my patients,
organic?
pardon?
Even the organic?
Not organic, but it's genetically modified. That's not true organic soy. Even then, the cultures that use lots of soy, like in the Orient, tend to use tempeh, which is a
Fermented.
fermented soy, more than they use tofu. In this country, tofu came along as a meat substitute, as a high protein substance, but it interferes with the assimilation of the vitamins, minerals, and proteins. So it was really being sold a bill of goods. We don't need that level of protein from soy. So if you eat in Oriental cooking, they'll use tempeh in small amounts, not large amounts of tofu like we tend to do here. We get bricks of it and cut it up into a whole thing. So it's an unfortunate use of a meat-like substance for the vegetarian world.
So then you're saying like the gluten, we should not even be using the soy,
Correct. Or minimize.
even the organic,
Even organic. Just minimize it.
just minimum.
Moderation.
What about soy milk?
Absolutely not soy milk. The two milks I don't like patients to use are soy milk and almond milk, unless they're not reactive to almonds, but many people are reactive to almond nuts and don't tolerate the almond milk. So they do better with milkadamia, which is macadamia milk, which most people can tolerate. Even hemp milk, that's high in fat. Coconut milk does fine. Oat milk does fine, as long as it's gluten-free oat flakes that they make it from. So there's ways of getting milks, or make your own out of cashew milk or other nut or seed milks that do fine.
You mentioned a while back about her. No, I don't know if it was her or her husband who had the finger.
The
Yeah.
gentleman's hand, yeah.
And I got a while back, I have no idea why, what did it, what they call trigger finger. Or at least that's what
Right.
I found when I looked on the web, where it would just all of a sudden lock up.
Right.
And so I'm wondering if that would possibly help drinking the herbal tea. Would that cleanse my liver and possibly fix it? And did you say it needed to be dandelion tea?
I mentioned dandelion and milk thistle, both. Now, trigger finger is another story, okay? So there are several things behind trigger finger. Many times I can just adjust the hand and wrist and forearm and elbow and shoulder and neck and have trigger finger resolve as a neurologic pattern. Then you also look as a body forming a tumor in the tendon sheath called a hamartoma or Dupuytren's contracture. Is that part of the process? So there's other things behind trigger finger. So I don't find that necessarily just a dietary issue. I find that's more likely a structural pattern.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Good. There's a question here. Up here, sweetheart. Thank you.
The Dupuytren's, is that just a structural thing that can be helped, or?
That's a great question. Dupuytren's contracture is a really frustrating one to deal with. So what happens is you get a hamartoma in the vincula of the tendon. So the tendon sheath has a sheath around the tendon, and you can get a growth that forms in that then starts to pull the tendon tighter and tighter and tighter. And so you get these thickened areas called hamartomas in the tendon sheath itself. Now, I've used castor oil with some patients to break down scar tissue. One patient told me that they use fermented ginger rubs. I don't know if that's an old wives' tale or not. I've never been able to validate that one. They claim that they used just that to rub it in, but castor oil makes more sense. I had one patient go to Germany and get it zapped with X-ray, therapy, which seemed a little harsh, and would create longer-term issues of scarring after 2 years. So you want to stretch out the tendon, and I do recommend castor oil, because castor oil will be absorbed. It will break down scar tissue and inflammation reduction. So that's what I suggest every night. Massage that in, and also use St. John's wort oil with that. So you can make a combination of the two. So St. John's wort oil and castor oil. Every night, rub it in, and then let it just seep in all night, and stretch out the tendon, stretch out the fingers. And it may take a year. There's no rush. Let me know. Good.
Continuing about the trigger finger thing, you said it can be a tumor?
No. It can be triggered possibly by a hamartoma, which is a tumor in the tendon sheath.
Because I have this finger, I've had a trigger finger, and I noticed this weird bump that's developed back here around the knuckle.
Okay.
Is that what?
That's more arthritic. That's not the tendon is on the palmar side, not the dorsal side.
Yeah, it used to be on
that.
this side.
Right.
It used to be something over here. Now it's on the back side.
Well, you have a tendon behind it, but it's usually the flexor tendons are the issue, not the extensor tendons or muscles. So that would be unusual. If you get a bump on the knuckle on the bone itself, that's more arthritic.
Okay.
If it's actually in the tendon, that would be very unusual.
Okay.
If I can just look at it and tell you in 2 seconds.
Yeah. Because I now have troubles with my thumb because after using the weed eater a lot this summer, it just seemed to start
Okay.
in that one too.
So that's from vibration and also gripping. Weed eaters, chainsaws, clippers. I see the classic spring, summer issues in gardening or that kind of thing. And you strain the muscle of the thumb. This is a common issue. And vibration will also be an irritation also, especially if it's already inflamed, like you were describing.
Yeah. Is percussion massager any good for muscles and?
I use it in my office. I have a large one and a small one, both percussion massagers. And I like them because they will break up scar tissue and reduce inflammation and relax the muscle structures if it's done properly. And then we'll do physical massage also at times with that. So it's helpful.
I've started using it some on my thumb, and it's not as painful, and it seems to have more movement.
Right. That's
so
good.
it seems like it's helped some.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they have different heads that you can use. You can use the round head, so it's easier to get to the muscle structure itself.
One I found most comfortable is the fork one because I can put it around, and it seems to get.
If it works for you, that's great.
Yeah.
That's usually done on either side of the spine.
Yeah.
But if it's on either side of the thumb web, so be it.
So most of it you need right in here.
Right.
Yeah.
The inner eminence. Great.
So I've been thinking about chocolate. I've always heard that it's mostly the sugar and the fat that make chocolate so bad for you. We have all these like cacao, roasted cacao beans.
Right.
And it helps with my headaches sometimes. I don't know if that's still, is there a problem with the actual product itself that makes it not healthy for you?
Well, it's going to be vasoactive like coffee, but it's still a theobromine. So it's a methylxanthine chemical like caffeine.
Like a coffee bean.
Like the coffee bean.
Okay.
So that's the downside of chocolate. So it's still a stimulant depressant. I wish I could tell you differently. Because of the vasodilation. So it's having that kind of an effect, but you want to see why are the headaches happening in the first place. Pardon? Yeah. So you want to deal with the root cause and not just do the caffeine or the chocolate cure.
I have one more question. Hesitant to ask this, but is nutritional yeast good or bad for you?
Great question. So that's some popcorn, right? You know, I get the controversy of this one. In this group, it's a loaded question. So nutritional yeast Depends on heating. If it's heated up, then it becomes a free glutamate. If it's not heated up, it isn't. So if you can find out from the manufacturer if it's heated up or not. Is the protein denatured or not? So if it's denatured protein, it becomes a free glutamate like MSG. If it isn't, it's okay. Pardon? Well, you're heating it up. You're making it a free glutamate. So just be aware of what it's doing and notice the effect on your body. That's the bottom line for me. What effect does it have on your body? And be honest with yourself. How do you feel that within a few hours of the next day? If you're more sluggish, more foggy-headed, notice that. If what? It's a possibility. And until the health really starts to regenerate strongly, it's hard to tell what's doing what. If you're fatigued most of the time or foggy-headed most of the time, or you're in pain most of the time, you're not going to be able to tell what's doing what, obviously.
You'll save a whole lot of money if you give it up.
Absolutely. No question. But I appreciate the questions. These are real. It's where we live, things we deal with all the time. We want to know, is this having an adverse effect on our health or is it neutral? Can we tolerate it or not? And I get asked this all the time in practice. And in Adventist groups, I'm always asked these questions. Popcorn and brewer's yeast, those are classics.
Maybe I don't need to say this actually. I just realized what I'm saying. I don't know if I can make cheese sauce without nutritional yeast, but I have sometimes used miso, and I just realized miso is a fermented soybean product, so you're probably not going to be a fan of that either.
Well, it's as a fermented soy product, you've broken down the phytates and the other damaging aspects of the soy.
Oh.
So it's much more tolerated.
Oh.
Yeah.
Good news.
Yeah. Now there's also non-soy miso. You can make garbanzo miso. There's other forms of miso where you don't have to deal with the soy issue at all.
I noticed when they were talking about nutritional yeast, you mentioned brewer's yeast, and since they aren't the same.
So I did research on yeasts in general. Brewer's yeast, nutritional yeast, there's a lot of similarities. Some people make them the same stuff, but the issue is all the same. Is it heated or non-heated?
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't split hairs on that one for most people.
One of the things you can do as a substitute for nutritional yeast is you take sesame seeds and you toast them in a stick-free pan, a frying pan, no oil, just toast them and turn them and keep turning them, and then grind that up and put some salt to it, and it's pretty similar to nutritional yeast. You can use it for Parmesan,
Right.
you can use it for popcorn. So there's ways to get around nutritional yeast.
It's probably cheaper. Good. There's another question brewing. Right over here, Virginia.
Back on the cooking thing. So, Rhonda, do you do cooking classes? Please? When?
Uh-huh. That's my desire that she does.
In Oregon, I did cooking classes since we've moved up to our 160-acre ranch, and we're trying to build a new building for the health retreat, and also we're getting ready to, somehow we need buildings for the school next year. And we need a ranch hand desperately, and a gardener, and I try to do all of it. So we didn't even do health retreats this year because our building isn't finished. It's getting close, but it's been really hard to move onto that big ranch and no help. So we're looking for someone to hire that's really good and responsible caregiver. We're praying every day, not a caregiver, a maintenance man, and someone that's mechanical and knows construction somewhat, And also, hopefully, we're telling the Lord we need the wife to be a gardener, and we have accommodations for them, nice place for them. But the problem is the harvest is ready and the laborers are few. So we don't have the help we need for me to be teaching right now. But I want to, and I want to get the cookbook done too.
So among the retreats we want to do is a cooking retreat. People come and learn ways of plant-based diets, and Rhonda's a superb chef. She's trained chefs to become vegan chefs. So her work is outstanding. She makes it taste good, high nutritious, high taste. And so I'm encouraging her to create a retreat to do that kind of thing and to finish the cookbook. So you're all welcome to call in and request that. And we'll get something like that set up next year. But right now we're in the thick in the middle of construction. I mean, that's tomorrow the hammers resume, and it's ongoing and active right now. So we're trying to get all the completion, all the buildings finished by this fall.
Let me have a word of prayer with you as we close. Father in heaven, Lord, just thank you so much for the ministry of Jim and Rhonda. And Lord, I pray that you continue to give them strength, Lord. And Lord, they're praying for somebody to come along and help them with the building and the gardening, Lord. And I just pray, Lord, you know who they need. And I just pray, Lord, that those people would be able to show up. Lord, we keep that before you in prayer. We know that you have the perfect person for them to come and team along with them, and bless their ministry, Lord. Bless us as we contemplate these things. May we put them into practice. We pray it in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. So I'd like to thank you all as well. It's been a pleasure for my wife and I to share this with you. If you have questions, you're always welcome to call. As I said, request my wife's cooking class. And I wish this church most blessings from the Lord, and very well. And truly, I beg of you, hear the message, live the message, and give the message. Give it first in how you live. Let your testimony be your own life, that others can say, tell me more. I want what you have. And then share the gospel with them. For this I pray in Jesus' name.